gospel is the better message. The word better is used many times in the New Testament to make this point. The world is full of messages, none of which are honest about human sin, and none of them proclaim our need for a God who loves sinners enough to give his one and only Son. This better message is what the world desperately needs. It is God's better message, and we at Mount Olive Lutheran in Madison, Wisconsin are blessed to hear it and privileged to share it with our needy community and world. Welcome to the better message.
Good Wednesday to you. It's the Better Message, and I'm Pastor Dan Torkelson, Senior Pastor at Mount Olive Lutheran Church in Madison, Wisconsin. It is Wednesday of the 14th Sunday after Pentecost. Not that you would have necessarily known that, because on Sunday we did not observe the 14th Sunday after Pentecost. We observed instead a festival day, regularly scheduled every year, September 14th, Holy Cross Day. So we changed the colors, and I got to wear my favorite stole, the red one, which I got for the 500th anniversary of the Reformation. So that's already, that's 8 years ago. Wow. And we have another festival day this Sunday, St. Matthew, Apostle and Evangelist, so we get to keep the red out, and I get to wear the same stole again. Oh, happy day. I won't wear it again until Reformation, but that's not too far down the road either. It's always great to have a red day. And yeah, by now you may have probably noticed that the Better Message is a new name. It's a new name for the podcast. Mondays at Mount Olive was a fine name to get started, but it was limiting. Some Mondays were just not practical for getting the podcast done. You might remember we had a few weeks that I jokingly retitled it Wednesdays at Whitney Way. I had made the decision to change names already at the end of last season in May. And after the most recent week of news, boy, am I glad that I did. Let's talk about this new name, where it comes from, what it means, and why we're going with it. I want to mention, too, you might notice a bit more polish as I've been kind of wrestling with some things, getting some bumper stuff up before and afterwards. It's been an interesting learning experience. I joked with Janelle in the office that being a pastor has meant sometimes having to learn skills I never planned on learning. I remember a number of years ago learning how to use Microsoft Video Editor for a bunch of series, and the Riverside software, the online software that we're using for these videos, has all the same features and many, many more, and I'm only slowly getting more acquainted with them. But hopefully you're going to see a more polished product as well. But let's get back to why did I change this name? Why this title? And I want to be very careful that we understand this title correctly. The Better Message. As the opener stated, the word better does get used quite a bit in the New Testament to describe the gospel message in contrast to all other messages. You especially see this in the book of Hebrews. The book of Hebrews is actually an early Christian sermon, we believe, and it is interesting. We're talking early New Testament. I mean, not long after Jesus dies and rises and ascends into heaven. There's indications to me that the preacher to the Hebrews knew Paul and knew John, but this is still not terribly late of a book. It's one of the earlier books of the later part of the New Testament. And the preacher is preaching to a Jewish crowd, which is why the book's called Hebrews. And what he's trying to get across is he's trying to get across the idea that what they have now in their Christianity as they converted over is better. He says it many times. And Paul uses this language a bit too. And indeed, we have a synod youth ministry called Higher Things. Higher Things actually is borrowing off the same language too. The idea of high schoolers setting their minds on things above, on a better, higher message is really, really valuable for high school youth. And it would have been for me when I was a high school youth too. I'm not saying anything about the current teenagers. This is just true enough that we need to dedicate our minds more to better things. And that would be true for all adults, which is why I thought it'd be good for the entire podcast and anyone who watched it, that we understand that this is what we have. What we have in the gospel of Jesus Christ is we have the better message. That language in Hebrews is meant to get the hearers of the original sermon to compare what they have now to what they've had in the past. And he doesn't use the superlative. That's the technical term for the highest word here. The highest word in The family of words would be good, better, best. He never says the best message. He always says the better. That middle level is what we call the comparative. And that's what I want for you, is I want you to hear that word comparatively. The reality is no other worldly philosophies or false religions teach the truth about humans, especially as we are sinful and fallen. They especially do not teach that humans cannot save themselves. Why is the Christian message better? Because it's honest and truthful and accurate about the sinful human condition, and it should not beat around the bush. Genuine Christianity should address that head on. On Sunday morning, it is not necessarily my job to preach about the world out there. I did a bit this past Sunday, but it is my job to preach about the sin in your heart, because as I'm applying those texts during the week, that's what I'm doing too, is I'm applying them to the sin in my heart. And I did a fair amount of that on Sunday as well. You may have noticed that I didn't, I talked about how if you want to have the wisdom of the cross, you want to have the wisdom of Christ, which is a nice little synonym for the better message. You have to understand that the mess of my life is my fault. And you have to understand that even if I don't necessarily agree with or play along with what the world is doing out there right now, it is the same. What you see right now is an extreme manifestation of the same problem I have, and I probably do contribute to it in many ways, especially when I let the other messages of the world be louder in my ears than the better message of Christ. There's a reason why it's so good to be in Bible study, to be in regular devotional practices, to meditate on the scriptures. The reason is to get your mind out of the world, because the world's got nothing. It does not have a better message. It doesn't even have a good one. No other worldly philosophy or world religion, because they get sin wrong, is also going to teach that there's a God who loves humans and saves them as a free gift. Even a lot of strands of Christianity just can't buy this entirely. The idea that somehow we have nothing to do with our salvation is pretty distinctively Lutheran, but go find for me how it's not true in the scriptures. I'm not concerned to make anyone a Lutheran nearly so much as I am to make them scripturally faithful. What I do believe that the ones who are most scripturally faithful, the ones who put the scriptures and the word of God first, will see that humans have nothing to say about salvation. That's God's business. It's part of the fact that God loved us. Paul said it profoundly in Galatians 2:21. If salvation could happen by works, then Jesus died for nothing. We had Holy Cross Day Sunday. Jesus died for everything. That's the wisdom of God. Everything else is folly. Everything else is foolishness. Don't let worldly messages, political philosophies, worldly philosophies, false religions, don't let them fool you, because they all say the same thing. No other worldly philosophy or world religion teaches that good works cannot save, but now can be the loving expression of the human set free from sin, which is what we teach. They all teach you save yourself. They all teach you do a better job. They all teach you you can dig yourself out. You can pull yourself up by the bootstraps. If Judaism and Islam have one thing in common, it's that. They may very much disagree on everything else, but they got that in common. Christianity does not. It is the only world religion that puts salvation in the hands of God, because humans can't do it. I believe that I cannot, by my own reason or strength, believe in Jesus Christ, my Lord, or come to him, is part of this better message. You can bet your bottom dollar. It's part of this better message. That's why it's so good to have a God who's so loving, so caring, so merciful, who takes care of us, because that's the truth. That's accuracy. The world, as it descends into all this senseless, needless, I'm going to say it, stupid violence, is just demonstrating how badly it needs a better message. Just how badly that is. And you heard me say that strongly Sunday. You're hearing me say it strongly here. I chose not to pick on any particular event last week. I spoke to all of it, because you may recall that on Monday, over there on X, on social media, one of the trending hashtags was World War III, because of drones that were fired by Russia over Poland, which, depending on how you interpret the NATO Constitution, could have been an act of war. So we had that appalling news on Monday. Then we did have the Charlie Kirk assassination. We did have another school shooting on Wednesday. It was an appalling week, and we were coming out of a week with an appalling murder in Charlotte the previous week. Notice how far they've disappeared off into the ether of the current news cycle. This is why, again, if you're obsessed with the current news cycle, I got a better message for you. Turn that off. Turn on the scriptures. Listen to that. And you know, one of the reasons why I chose this title for us in particular is because here in our city, in Madison, being a university city, and I'm not being critical, please, I'm not being critical of Madison, but it would seem to me that we are more prone. We are, all the messages of the world come home to roost here in one way or another. For me, that was part of the fun and the challenge of accepting your call and becoming your pastor. Was I knew that was going to be the case. I knew, and I'd been playing around with this language of the better message in my previous church as well. I knew I had a better message, and I knew that there'd be no better place to test that. No better place to test that here in the state of Wisconsin than the city of Madison. And I love this city. I really do. Great restaurant scene, great cultural scene. The university is both a strength and probably a problem in some ways because of all these other messages. Sadly, UW is not all that unique. The trends that are going on in universities in general are definitely visible here. It's just the reality of it, but I'm not complaining. What I'm saying is I'm ready for the challenge. Bring it on. Because I know I have a better message. Everything else right now is leading to hate and anger. That's not a win. And it's not the fault of the Christian church. It is not the fault of our message. It is not the fault of the cross of Christ. We have a better message. The world could afford to actually quit blaming God for everything when it's making such a colossal mess of things right now. This is not the time to blame God. It ain't on him. I can tell you that. Love, grace, mercy, and hope. Yeah, that's always the better message. Teaching people to forgive rather than to hate. Helping Christians learn to listen even when what we're hearing is not best, but to show mercy in that way and to speak well, eloquently, with a better message, helping you understand that in the face of all this bad news, it's not what you say to it that matters first. It's having the right mindset, and the right mindset will influence how well you speak to it. But that right mindset has to begin with the fact that because you are a Christian, because you are saved by Christ, you have a better message. Challenge the people in your life. Challenge them to demonstrate how what they believe is better. Challenge them to demonstrate how anything's better than forgiveness. Challenge them to demonstrate how anything's better than love and mercy. Because the world's not learning violence from the church. The church has had its violent moments, and that's because the church in the world still bears the marks of sin. But that is not the fault of the message God gave. That's the fault of the church not listening to it. And here in America, a lot of American Christianity is watering it down for no good reason. My job as a pastor, my office as a pastor, is to give you the better message, which is why you hear me put the message above all the other concerns. Concerns about politics, concerns about worship, concerns about all sorts of other things. These are lower level concerns. As long as the message is primary, I can handle just about anything. But the message has to be there. We are not compromising on it. Not right now. The world has seen the church compromise on it enough. All the world learned from that is that the world tries to believe now it has a better message. What I'm saying is it doesn't have the results to demonstrate that. It's time for the world and the church to recommit to the better message. So that's why we're doing this. But I want to say one more thing about this, and that is that by calling it the better message, by using the comparative better rather than the superlative best, I am trying to help you understand, though, that we are not boasting. This is not us being arrogant. This is not us being prideful. If anything, it is a real privilege to have this message. It's why we need to steward it well. It's why we need to make sure that everything we do on Sunday morning maximizes it in one way or another. That's why that's the most important thing. There's what people want and there's what people need. And I'm well aware that the Bible is much more clear on what we need than we are. And what we need is we need the gospel of Jesus Christ. We need Jesus, Jesus, only Jesus. There was a lot of talk this week about the pastor, if they didn't mention a certain name, who was tragically assassinated last week, was not being faithful. What in the world? What in the world? The church preaches the name of Christ. At the name of Jesus, every knee shall bow. And in all honesty, if I give Charlie Kirk a little credit. I think he may have understood that much. I have no reason to think he didn't. We have the responsibility and the privilege and the honor of bringing this better message to our world. And boy, right here in Madison, we have great opportunities for it. Wonderful opportunities for it. God has given us a better message. We should receive that humbly, thankfully. But to broadcast it in our lives through words and deeds of love, not words and deeds of anger, not words and deeds of anxious reaction. If you already have the better message, there's no need to be anxious. There's no need to view the whole thing as winning an argument. That would be my critique of Charlie Kirk, is that he was a good arguer. And the reality is I'm not so sure everything's an argument. I think everything is a proclamation of Jesus Christ for us as Christians. But that being said, that's where my critique kind of ends. I still feel that it was tragic what happened, because in America, so no one should die for free speech. Simple as that. He had a right to do that, and he had a right to keep on living and keep on doing it. And that's what made that tragic. But here at Mount Olive, our task is a little different. Our task is to proclaim the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ, and to rejoice in that. I do not wish to anger anyone over anything I've said or not said. The reality is I'm sticking to Jesus. Just like on Sunday, I stuck to the cross of Christ. And in this podcast, I'm sticking to the better message, because that's where we're going to come to greater clarity. I thought for today I would visit our Sunday Bible study a little bit in conclusion. And I'm gonna build off the better message here, that one of the great things about the scriptures is that they are so real. Part of that whole rationale in the previous screen about what makes the better message is tied to the fact that it's honest with you about who you are as a sinner. It's honest with you about who God is as holy, righteous, loving, and merciful, slow to anger, abounding in steadfast love, gracious, compassionate. You know all the words that are there. And whenever I go into the scriptures, and it's one of the reasons why I've grown to love the Gospels in particular, is that I see all that humanity and reality in Jesus in particular. And what we were finding, we went through Jonah rapidly. I was kind of playing on the fact that I knew the Bible study knew the main story of Jonah. Jonah's actually a story in, I would say, 3 parts. Well, maybe I'd argue 4 parts. And what's interesting is that a lot of Bible scholars have recognized that it's one of the few books in the Bible that actually shows us some humor. And it's fun to have, as part of a better message, a Bible, a sacred scriptures that's got humor in it, and it actually does. I think there's plenty of wonderful irony in the prophets and in Jesus. When Jesus calls Nathanael to be his disciple, it was actually Philip and Nathanael in John chapter 1. You'll notice Nathanael has this little jab at Jesus. Can anything good come out of Nazareth? And Jesus doesn't do what this failing world does. He doesn't say, "You hater, you're an awful person. That's terrible. You shouldn't have said such an awful thing. Maybe I'll engage now in rhetorical or physical violence on you." Jesus says, "Good joke." He says, "I appreciate the humor. I like you." And if you think it's great that, just because I saw you sitting under a fig tree, that said something special, you're going to see some really special things. You keep following me. And so there's humor in that story too. But Jonah, there's humor all over the place. And what it is it's really sort of God's sense of humor. And if Jonah wrote the book, and let's say he wrote it after the fact, which I suspect it would have had to happen, it probably says that Jonah learned to laugh at himself too. But I just kind of put in these boxes here on the screen all the sort of humorous moments of Jonah. Going back to verse 3, God calls Jonah, says, "Go to Nineveh, preach against it." That'd be like him saying to me, "Dan, go to Tehran and preach against it." Nineveh was the enemy's most immoral city in a lot of ways, and very influential city at the time, but it was very, very immoral. And Jonah's motivated to run the wrong way. I always, it's just an instinct. I always think of wrong way Jim Marshall, the Minnesota Vikings defensive tackle. And I think it's so unfortunate that such a great defensive tackle, he is in the Pro Bowl, the Hall of Fame. He was in the Pro Bowl too, I'm pretty sure. But he is in the Hall of Fame. Should be remembered for the fact that he picked up a fumble and ran it into the wrong. I've seen interviews with him where it seems that he did find a sense of humor about the whole thing. There's kind of a very funny picture of the tight end for the San Francisco 49ers congratulating him in the end zone after scoring for the wrong team. But anyway, it's tragic in a way. You don't want someone's legacy to be remembered for something like that, especially when you're that good of an athlete. But Jonah is wrong way Jonah. He runs the opposite way. He's going to Tarshish, which is modern day Spain, which is what we think of as modern day Spain. But in Jonah's day, that's the other end of the world. That's the other side of the Mediterranean Sea, and there really is not much of world beyond the Mediterranean Sea in the Mideast. At least a sense of it at that time. So Tarshish is about as far as you can run. It's like if you started digging in the northern kingdom in Israel in Jonah's time, you would have wound up in Tarshish, like we joke about, and winding up in China, which is actually the other end of the world. I would find out a number of years ago when I was there. In verse 5, Jonah gets on the boat and he falls asleep. And I find that humorous because it just demonstrates how running away from the Lord is a very tiring thing. He has to be woken up in the middle of an awful storm. The storm itself won't wake him up because running away from the Lord wore him out that much. In verse 9, Jonah finally does preach the truth that he's a Hebrew who worships, the one who actually made the sea and the dry land, the heavens and the earth and all that. But he's so reluctant when he does it. In verse 11, the sailors ask a fun question. What should we do to you? You obviously have the higher God than we do. You've angered him. What should we do to you? Great question. But it's kind of a funny one. And Jonah says, throw me overboard. And they don't want to do it. They try to spare him anyway. But eventually they do throw him overboard. And then when he's thrown overboard and the storm stops, every one of the sailors sacrifices to Jonah's God. And that's what's so fun. The Jonah who ran away from the assignment, the Jonah is so reluctant, has a 100% success rate by the end of verse 1. And that's humorous too. That's very ironical, and that gives you an idea of God's sense of humor. In chapter 2 at the very end, it's just a little note that some people find funny. The word actually is vomit there, the great fish, when he's done with Jonah, when he gets back to shore, vomits Jonah out. And Jesus will take this whole thing and he'll make it a parallel to his resurrection, to his time in the tomb. Just as Jonah spent three days in the belly of the whale, so the Son of Man will spend 3 days in the belly of the earth. But in fulfillment of one of the Psalms, it says death cannot contain him. The grave cannot contain him, just like the idea of vomiting him out. In verse 5 of chapter 3, finally Jonah does go to Nineveh. He's got a second chance here. He does preach against it. It is a 5-word sermon that he preaches all over the place. Very minimal. There's more gospel than law. It's 40 more days. That's the gospel. That's 3 words. Nineveh destroyed. That's the law. That's 2 words. I joked that Jonah had read Walther, C.F.W. Walther, the founder of the LCMS, who said, let the gospel predominate. He did. And what is interesting is that the entire city repents. Jonah continues to have a 100% success rate. But if that wasn't enough, the king heard the message and he orders a proclamation. He puts on his sackcloth and ashes, goes repentant, orders a proclamation. And in the proclamation, he says, and the cattle should be in sackcloth and ashes as well. So again, humor. The cattle are repenting. Wow. How crazy is that? And lastly, Jonah's very pouty behavior throughout the final chapter is kind of funny in its own way, too. The last verse of chapter 4, God puts a rhetorical question to Jonah, and I think Jonah writes the book later to actually answer it. But it's a rhetorical question, if you cared so much, Jonah, about the vine I provided to provide you a little shade for one day, why shouldn't I care about the great city of Nineveh, 120,000 in all, of people who do not know their right hand from their left? And then it adds the last words, and this is a question, remember, it's a rhetorical question, and also much cattle. Some people call Jonah the cartoon of the Old Testament, and it not without some validity. There's some humor there, and that's part of the better message too. The Bible is so real. I've got the best message in the world when I step into a pulpit on Sunday morning, and yes, I have Sundays when I struggle, and I think all pastors do. Quite interestingly, this past Sunday, the struggle was in making sure I got the better message right after such an awful week. But it was also not as hard a sermon to preach as you might have thought. And what I found was that by preaching the cross of Christ, I had something that spoke God's wisdom to everything we are seeing. And I was so appreciative of so many of your comments. I really appreciate that. One of you said, thanks for bringing it, Pastor. I don't need to bring it every Sunday. You don't need me necessarily to bring it like that every Sunday, but you do need me to bring the better message every time I see you. And trust in the fact that I am going to fail on that. And when I do, just tell me lovingly, and hopefully everything will be fine. But the better message is what we are all here for. That's why the podcast changed its name, and that is going to be our theme as a church moving forward. We are sitting with some tremendous opportunities in front of us in a wonderful city, a city that challenges us at a lot of levels, but a city that also blesses us at a lot of levels. But what we want to be is the best blessing we can be back to it. And we have a better message. And everything we do from Sunday morning to the next Sunday morning really needs to broadcast that better message. And we'll be talking more about some of our other offerings in that regard along the way. You'll notice there's a number of technological updates going on, including the move to YouTube for the live stream. And with YouTube, we're able to do some better editing. We're able to do some better sharing across other social network platforms. You may have noticed that I actually did do an edit of the live stream so that there was actually just the sermon as another video, and we're able to just put that out there. And I'm called to preach mainly to you, but what we do have is the better message for everybody, and so hopefully we can do a bit of that as well, and hopefully take on the challenge. Put the challenge to Madison, put the challenge to the world around us. If you think you have a better message, prove it. Right now the world's not proving it, and I don't think it ever will. And that's because I don't think it ever has. You have the better message. That's the good news. That's the good news for this week's podcast. That's the good news every day. So thanks for tuning in to the better message. I hope you all have a very blessed week. God bless.
The Better Message is a production of Mount Olive Lutheran Church in Madison, Wisconsin. If you know someone who needs the better message of Christ's gospel, please click share and share it with your friends online and family. If you'd like to hear more of the Better Message or watch any of our other videos, including live streams of our Sunday Divine Services, click subscribe to our YouTube channel. To learn more about Mount Olive, visit www.molc.us. That's www.molc.us. The Lord bless you today and always.